Welcome to the Healthy Home Show. I'm Fernanda Furman, a healthy home architect.
Hi, I'm Eric Furman, healthy home contractor.
And today we're here with Debra and Larry. We're so excited to talk to you guys. We have been waiting for this interview. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
We're happy to be here.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of people have been asking about, tiny homes. And Debra has been, a visionary and a pioneer in her field of non-toxic products for the past 40 years.
Yes.
So she's going to be here now with Larry, and they're going to talk about how they are building their tiny home, which is a new adventure for them.
It is. But we have a lot of experience with building non-toxic. I actually built what I think is one of the first non-toxic homes in 1985. And I didn't build it, but I remodeled it. And I did it all by myself before I even met Larry, who knows all about building. And but I just went through the house and I found everything that I thought was toxic at the time. And I hired somebody who actually followed all of my instructions. And I had this great little cottage out in the woods, and it was all non-toxic, and it really contributed to my healing to have that. And from there, then I went on to, after Larry and I met, we remodeled another little cottage in the woods, and then moved to Florida and remodeled 2 houses in Florida. So we have a lot of experience. Plus, I've also been a consultant on many, many projects in the last 40 years.
Nice. So we're going to read your biography, and then we're going to jump into your story, and we can wait to hear everything about it.
Great.
All right.
So Debra and Larry have been remodeling homes to be toxin-free for more than 30 years. Debra provides the non-toxic know-how, and Larry the building skills. They have remodeled 3 homes on their own, plus Debra has worked with homeowners, architects, and builders to specify non-toxic homes for numerous homes across the country. They are currently building a toxic-free tiny home on the Motorhome chassis in Sonoma County, California. Yeah. So as you're saying, you bring all the know-how of the non-toxic, and Larry is the builder, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And we create together the design. He has some really good design ideas. We had one in one of our houses, we had a very small kitchen. And so we were walking around a corner, and the corner of the counter was there, and it was a sharp corner. And he just cut off the end of the corner so that it was a smooth passage and wouldn't hit us as we went by. I would have never thought of that, but he thought of it.
Yeah, I thought, well, this is where the problem is. We'll just take this away.
Yeah. And he's always creating things. I mean, he has a really good eye.
So that's kind of a little bit of us as well. As an architect, I would come up with, babe, I had this idea. We just
I'll stop her. Just raises the hair in the back of my neck.
He understands that.
You guys know that word? Can you just build a custom closet for me?
Yeah, just move the foundation over 6 inches this way.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he's a perfectionist, right? So he's very, like, everything he does, he puts his heart into it. So there's no just when somebody is a perfectionist.
Yeah, we could totally relate. Yeah, the design and the builder, that's where we are as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun to discover the adventures that you guys have been on. And I'm really excited to learn about tiny homes, because that is something we have not explored at all.
Yeah. And how did you guys come up with that idea of building your own tiny home?
Well, I don't remember the exact moment when we first saw a tiny house. They've been around for 6 or 7 or 10 years. And, but suddenly it seemed like we were seeing them in a lot of places, not the homes themselves, but seeing it in magazines or on TV or things like that. And we just looked at that and we said, well, this really makes sense for us. But at first it seemed impossible. And one of the things that, kind of where we and many other people are coming from, where the world is today, is that especially in the last 30, 20 years, there's been this big move to have houses that are bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's, I think, just where our consumer culture is. And so we're encouraged to have bigger and bigger houses with bigger and bigger mortgage payments. And I grew up as a child not wanting a big house, but wanting to have a house at all. And so when I got to be an adult living in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was just out of reach. And so I ended up buying a cottage. The first house that I bought was 700 square feet. So that's considered to be a tiny house by today's standard. And I also came from living in San Francisco, in the city itself. I lived in studio apartments, which is just, I don't even know what the square footage is, 400 square feet or something like that.
4,500 usually.
Yeah, and so when the first time I had an apartment of my own, I had a living room, I had a really big walk-in closet, and I had a little tiny kitchen. And that's city living. So the whole idea of living tiny, I think, is not a brand new one. But when you're thinking about a house and putting it like in the space of a studio apartment, that's a whole different concept. And when you're putting two people in that amount of space, and you're thinking of it as how can you get the maximum amount of function out of a small space, that's a whole different concept than living in a studio apartment 30 years ago. I mean, it was like I was in my early 20s and I had no possessions. And so it was just, a chair. I had a table and 4 chairs. I had a futon on the floor. I had a wing chair, and I had a bookshelf, and I had a desk, and that was it. That fits into a studio apartment. I had some clothes, I had some kitchen stuff, but it's not like, you're grown up now and you've been coming from a 1,600 square foot house and you have all this stuff and 2 people. And this is where people are now is that they say, well, we have to have this big house because that's what the expectation is. And then people mortgage their lives away. Well, we just got tired of having our lives be about paying the mortgage. And really, I had a good 20 years of the mortgage was like way out of reach for me. So every month it was, how are we going to pay the mortgage? How are we going to pay the mortgage? But I had this idea that I had to have a big house, And we actually moved from California to Florida because we went there on vacation, and I could buy a 1,600 square foot house for the same amount of money as my 600 square foot house.
Less money.
Less money. It was actually less money.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It is crazy. Yeah. So we moved there, and we enjoyed living in our big house, and it was like, wow, it's like the first day we walked in, 12-foot ceilings, oh my God. and these big rooms, and we moved all our stuff in, and there was all this space left,
Yeah.
And
so then we started collecting more stuff.
More and more stuff. Yeah. To the point that when we left, we actually had to just leave things on the front lawn for people to just walk away with for free, because we had to take them out of the house and they wouldn't fit in the moving truck. What was a 24-foot moving truck? Yeah. It wouldn't, we couldn't fit any more stuff in the truck. So what a tiny house offers for us is, number one, we can own a house. I mean, to live where we're living right now, we live in Sonoma County in California. I think probably the least expensive house, they start at like $1 million in this town. And they're not mansions for $1 million. They're cottages for $1 million. But we live here because Larry's mom lives here and we live on her property. But if we wanted to then stay here and buy our own place, it's at least $1 million. Well, I don't want to spend the rest of my life paying $1 million mortgage. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah, you can buy a fixer for half that much, but still $500,000 for a fixer is pretty pricey.
Yeah, for an 800 square foot fixer.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think you touched on a very good, very important point. It's not even, even if you could buy, but do you want to live the rest of your life tied to that mortgage payment, to that lifestyle where you have to work more.
Well, I don't want that. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. And so it was like I made a conscious decision to sell my house, and I made a profit, not a large profit, but I made a profit that I could take a little time off and come to California and put some money in the bank for the tiny house. And then we're going to build our house, and we're not going to have a mortgage. Mm. And so both of us Larry's 65, I'll be 65 this year. So now we're going to have secure housing. Our housing is paid for our retirement. We can live anywhere we want to live because we can move our house. And something that's really important to me is that I want to live in a non-toxic house. And if you're traveling around, which is what we want to do, and you're staying in random places, you never know what your toxic exposure is going to be. So now we're going to be able to take our non-toxic tiny house, which we're building on a motorhome chassis, so that it's not a truck and a trailer, but it's all one piece. Then we can go anywhere we want. We could even put it on a boat and take it to Europe or wherever we want to go. And it gives us freedom to have our income go towards our life instead of our house, and to have a protected, non-toxic place to live, and to know that we have secure housing. And those are the reasons why we decided to do this.
Here's another thing too. Last couple of years in this area, there's been rampant wildfires in Santa Rosa nearby, and if you have a motorhome, you can just get in it and take it somewhere else, away from the fire.
We were evacuated last October with the fire, and we went and spent a week in San Francisco, and it was $1,000. And we didn't even stay in a hotel. That was just buying food, and we went and stayed in San Francisco because we had a friend we could stay with. But it can cost a lot of money to go someplace else. And if you can take your home with you, and everything is all there that you need, your office is set up, I'll be able to go anywhere and still continue to do my work and my writing and whatever I want to do, take my things with me, be secure.
Yeah.
So I hear this a lot, and this is one of the things I want to get into, and you said it right away. So your motivating factor is freedom, having more time to enjoy life, and then also the freedom to travel. You're not locked down in one area. So my first question would be, I remember, as an analogy, just for myself to kind of grasp this, is RVs have been around for many, many, many decades. So I'm trying to gauge, okay, so I remember Jay Leno had this, he said, hey, somebody said, you can turn your voice into text and send it, and then I have an app that turns the text back into voice. He's like, that's a phone call. That's a phone call. So my first question would be why wouldn't you just buy an RV? So what is the control or the motivating factor to do it yourself?
Very good question. Yeah. We did buy an RV. But the RV that we bought was, we actually said first of all, let me say, we're building a tiny house on a motorhome chassis. And the reason that we're doing that is because there are regulations about where you can park tiny houses
on
trailers. And so people are running into difficulties with that. And so that's a whole separate issue. But we looked at all those questions about where are we going to put it? Do we want to buy a piece of land? Do we want to be mobile, blah, blah, blah. And what we found was that a motorhome can be parked anywhere. You can park it on the street and sleep in it on the curb, and it's not illegal.
Yeah. You
can park it there are places like Walmart that will let you park in their parking lot if you're an RV. Yeah. So RVs have a whole different set of rules than tiny houses, but that are trailers.
Yeah.
But there's no rule that says what goes on that RV chassis needs to be an RV. So that
Great.
that was a really big deciding factor for us, because you're building a tiny house on a platform, and it doesn't matter if it's a trailer or if it's an RV, it's still a platform.
Mhm.
So, but the reason why we didn't just go buy an RV is a couple of them. One is they're really, really toxic, and we didn't want to live in a toxic RV. They're really, really not stylish, and they're really, really not set up like a tiny home with all the clever things for storage. And so what we did was we decided what we wanted was a motorhome with a good engine and a trashed house part.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we found for $1,500.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So another quick, the biggest thing for me is, like, as you know, we talked in our other interview about safety inside of a dwelling. Is my first thing is when you're talking about being a motor vehicle is safety. So you guys are going to keep the seats and the engine and the driving portion of the car or the RV.
Right.
Is that true? Okay.
So then, but then the house part, the tiny house, will sit on where the RV part used to be. And so right now the original idea was that we were going to leave the shell and build the house inside.
Mm-hmm.
But we've decided that we're going to demolish the shell too and just start with a platform and actually build a house on top of the platform.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually solves the zoning regulations that, you know, usually people would have issues with, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because anybody can park their motorhome on their property, but they can't. There's all these things about, you know, I don't remember all the names about, you know, extra dwelling units and, you know, things like that. But there's limits to what you can build. You know, like you can build little shacks and things like that, but depending on what the zoning is.
There are some places that have homeowners association regulations against having a
that would be us.
property.
Yeah.
That would be a big no-no here. Yeah.
But if you don't have a homeowners association with those regulations, then you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could in the future if we wanted to. I mean, we don't need to right now because we're living with Larry's mom and there's plenty of room to park it while we're building it. And we actually have no plans to leave after it's done. We'll just continue to live here. We enjoy living here. His mom wants us to stay. So we'll stay as long as we have the opportunity to stay. And but she's 88 years old, so it's not going to be forever. But when it's time to go, all we have to do is drive away, you know, because by that point we will be living there.
Yeah.
In the tiny house.
So you mentioned one of the motivating factors was also to be able to use non-toxic materials and how toxic the, you know, existing motorhomes are made.
Horrible.
Yeah.
They're
so can you name some of?
Go ahead.
Can you name some of those materials? Like, what are you guys choosing different? What are you guys keeping, and what are you guys choosing that it's non-toxic?
We got rid of everything because basically, as we started taking it apart, it was all vinyl and polyurethane foam. Everything was fake. Particle board, polyurethane foam, and vinyl. That's the whole entire interior of any motorhome.
We took about a half a ton of that out.
Yeah. So by the time we did that, there was just nothing left. So what we'll be doing instead is that we're going to just build, use the standard materials that you or I would use to build the house. Wood,
standard non-toxic materials.
Standard non-toxic materials, wood. And the limiting factor, the thing that's going to be creative about this is that there are, because we're going to be rolling this house down the street, we can't use some of the materials that you would normally put in a house, like tile, things that would crack as you move them. So we're just
or drywall.
or drywall.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to be doing things like a lot of tiny houses use with siding. It's that the tongue and groove that they put on the wall. You know, I forgot what that's called. Anyway, when they build tiny houses, they don't often use drywall. They just put wood on the wall. And or you know, so we're really looking at using things like wood, like corrugated aluminum, like, you know, what else are we thinking of?
Metal siding.
Metal siding. Yeah, we're still researching all these materials, and so like people will use metal like troughs for bathtubs and stuff like that. I mean, people are really creative, and we're even looking at, well, do we need to have do we really need to have a shower? Do we, you know, do we need, what really are, I mean, a big day in my life was the day that I sold my sofa, because you go through life having this standard lifestyle that we think this is the lifestyle. So how are you going to fit that big house lifestyle into a tiny house? Well, we weren't sitting on the sofa. You know, we really noticed that the way we lived our life in our 1,600 square foot house was that we cooked in the kitchen. I worked in my office, and essentially we lived in the bedroom. We lived in bed. Not that we laid in bed all day, but Larry broke his back, and so his favorite position is to lie down. So we eat in bed. We, you know, anything that we can do, if we're talking to each other, he lies down. And so basically what we need is, we need an office, we need a kitchen, we need a bathroom, and we need a bed, because that's the way we live. We don't even need 1,600 square feet. We were not sitting at our dining table. We were not sitting on our sofa. We had this huge living room. You know, it was all decked out so that people could come over. We would have community meetings in our living room. But we don't need that in a tiny house. And when we really looked at it, we could have everything that we actually need to live.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about a shower, it made me also think about disposable, right? So when you have toilet, how in a tiny home, how do you keep the smell out of it? How do you dispose all the trash and the garbage and everything?
Do you want to answer that one?
Well, we have chosen to have a composting toilet, which is made of, I think it's pine, tongue and groove.
I thought it was cedar. Is it cedar? Pine? Anyway, it's wood.
Pine or cedar, whatever.
Oh, wait. A composting toilet made out of pine? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I just wanted to make sure I heard that right. Okay.
It's all wood.
It's a pine box, essentially, with a toilet seat on the top.
Yeah.
And
a wood toilet seat on the top.
There's plastic buckets inside, one for the poo and one for the pee. And the poo you cover up with sawdust.
You just have a little sawdust on the side.
A little sawdust and cover it up. And you need to empty it every now and then.
But it doesn't smell. It actually doesn't smell.
Doesn't smell at all.
And
It
then
stays inside the
Yeah.
living quarters.
Yeah, it doesn't smell. So, and we've been using it because sometimes we sleep out there. We had set up a bed just to have fun sleeping in the space, you know.
Try it out.
and try it out. And one of the first things that we bought was the composting toilet. That was one of the first decisions we made, because we're really looking to see how can we minimize our resource use. And so the whole idea of a flushing toilet, you know, has all that water and the plumbing and all that stuff. And this is just a box, a wooden box with a wooden toilet seat on top and a container of sawdust and a scoop. And that really, it composts itself, and then you can actually, you know, just put it in, like if we were staying at a campground or something, you can just put it in the garbage, or we could put it in our garden or whatever. And so I really like this idea of, you know, this cycle of, you know, food coming out of the garden, processed through our bodies, the compost goes back to the earth.
A lot of the smell comes from the poo and the pee mixing together. which
And
is
when-
what happens in a standard toilet and a standard
Yeah.
motorhome toilet.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary. There's a separator in the composting toilet, so the pee goes in one container and the poo goes in another, and they don't smell bad.
So, just for clarification too, so you guys came up with this idea. You've already got the trailer. So where are you guys in the build process? Is it completely built? Are you right in the middle of it?
We're at the beginning.
Beginning.
We're at the beginning. We've had the motorhome for a year. We got it in January of last year, but then we had, you know how projects go. You start working on it, and then stuff happens.
Yeah.
And
We had stuff.
We had stuff that we had to handle that had nothing to do with that. But now the way is clear, and we've also spent a lot of that time just getting ideas and researching and starting. We have a blog called tinyhousetoxicfree.com, and so we're collecting ideas and watching videos and a lot of times people will say, well, we planned it for a year before we even started building.
Sure.
This one video that I'm going to be putting up probably next week. This woman, she actually built her tiny house in a van. It's even smaller than ours. It's just in a van. And she said that she wrote down everything that she did for a period of time so that she could make sure that she had a space for everything that she wanted to do inside her van. So it's not just about, I mean, some people will go and buy tiny houses and they're just kind of like buying a subdivision house, you know, somebody else designs it and you move in and you fit yourself into it. But then there's the other whole philosophy of you're building this house for your life.
It's highly customized.
It's very customized to you. And that's what we're doing.
So that's what I hear is basically your house, it's built based on your habits.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. Like for us, you know, having a big house, my mom lives with us.
Yeah.
So we have to have that spare room because part of our life includes having my mom with us.
Us too, except we're living in her house.
Yeah. So, and that brings me to another question, which is like a lot of people have the bad habits of, or not even knowing, using, you know, toxic chemicals to clean their home. So in a tiny house, like Eric and I were talking to Deborah yesterday, we had an interview with her. So one of the things that it's huge for us, that's what helped me getting better when I got ill, was the air quality. Like having fresh air, removing all the toxic products that we had in the house, changing our habits on how we clean, for example. Mm-hmm. In a tiny house, how do you, you know, work with the air quality, and how do you store your products?
Well, first of all, we won't have any toxic products. And because I haven't had any toxic products in 40 years. So I'm not concerned about having to protect us from anything toxic because it's not going in the first place. But the thing about air quality, that's an interesting question, because the thing that brought all these toxic issues to the fore all those years ago was the whole issue about saving energy and tightening our houses. And so in the past, people had a lot of leaky cracks in houses. And so there would be air exchange. And you start closing up all those leaky cracks to save energy. And you start getting indoor air quality problems from all the toxic stuff. And that's how the whole field of indoor air quality started. Now you go into a tiny house, and it's smaller. And so there's less air to dilute whatever it is. But there's not going to be anything that needs to be diluted. But we do need to, we're breathing. So we do need to have oxygen. And so, you know, we'll have ventilation, we'll have air exchangers, we'll have those kinds of things, so that we'll have vents in the roof and things like that, so that there will be air exchange. But there just won't be toxic chemicals, period.
Yeah, we're not using toxic building materials, which is what most houses.
We don't use toxic cleaning products. We don't use
from.
toxic pesticides. Nothing is toxic in our house.
Yeah. So, excuse me if I come off as the devil's advocate here. I'm really curious, but a lot of my questions, I just keep thinking safety, safety, safety as a contractor. You know, it's like a lot of the codes were written because somebody died or got hurt in the home. And so the tiny home movement, it's kind of the wild, wild west right now with nobody really regulating it. I've got my opinions on regulation too, you know, but I mean, a lot of it is for safety. So I think about things like air, like you mentioned. For example, in California, as you probably well know, we've got this huge buffer of air, and a leaky home. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost non-existent in California up until recently, because the amount of carbon monoxide that you would need to be lethal, I mean, you're talking like 8 to 10 hours in a very confined space, which is just not going to happen in a California home.
Yeah.
Now it is becoming an issue. So those are the things I think of in a tiny home, like even storing poo. And, you know, there's methane, there's toxic stuff from that. Anything you do, even just simple things like we've noticed from cooking, for example, like even if you don't have a gas-fired stove, just the carcinogens and the particulates that are released from combusting materials, I mean, that's huge. And so you could build a very toxic environment within seconds as opposed to minutes or hours in a tiny home. So,
well, that's where there needs to be ventilation, and that needs to be designed in. One of the things that I'm concerned about, because I watch a lot of videos and tiny home shows, is that people are just not aware of toxics in the tiny home communities. Yeah. And especially if you watch a show where somebody has hired a contractor and they just say, this is what we want, and then they come back 6 months later or whatever, and here's your beautiful house made out of oriented strand board. And, you know, people just are not aware of how toxic those houses are. And this is part of what we're trying to do, is show that you need to be concerned about these things. And I don't know if people are getting sick in these houses or not getting sick in these houses, that they're probably spending a lot of time outdoors, some of them, you know, but that this is absolutely something of concern, and the tiny house community needs to be addressing it more. I know we'll address it because we're aware of it. But it's something that the tiny house community needs to put more attention on.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to bring up this conversation, because just, you know, building a tiny home, will fit your needs, but how is that going to affect your health if you don't use
exactly
the right materials? So having somebody like you and Larry that people can go to you and consult, and getting as a coach to help them through the process, I think it's very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it is too. And I think that we're going to find that, well, one thing that I'm excited about is that a lot of people need to have non-toxic homes. They either need them because, like, you know from your experience, that you got sick, and so you need to have a non-toxic environment to live in. There's a lot of people who are in that situation. They're not working. They don't have enough money to buy a big house or build a big non-toxic house. But this makes non-toxic living affordable for almost anyone. And I don't want to assume that anyone could come up with the amount of money it would take to buy a tiny house. But if there were, you know, a foundation that wanted to provide housing, providing a fleet of non-toxic tiny houses would be amazing. You know, and it just cuts down the cost in order to have safe housing. And it, I mean, I think that it could, like, I know here in California that some cities are building tiny houses to help with the homeless problem. Are they non-toxic? No. But this, we need to absolutely, tiny houses are a wave of the future and a solution to housing. Yeah. But they also need to be non-toxic.
The other thing, talking about that, Fernanda and I have this conversation a lot, is the amount of homes. There is not especially in California, as you mentioned, it's the same thing down here in Southern California. I mean, you know, $500,000, you can't even really find a house for that. So a lot of existing homes, not a lot of homes being built. So there's definitely a housing shortage with the amount of people that are of age to live on their own. There's way more than there are places to live, unfortunately. Yeah, I could see that definitely being a possibility. I'm assuming at some point some regulatory agency is going to get involved, because so things that, because we have little children, and so like thinking of things like electrical issues and fires, and there's reasons why, things like fire retardants came out and all of these, going back to the codes, it's like, I don't want to squash anything, but at the same time, I definitely have a concern for people, not like yourself, that have probably way less experience getting into it, thinking it's going to solve these problems, but then they're exposing themselves to potentially many other problems. So yeah, hopefully you guys through this will be able to share and develop some
well, that's the point. That's the whole point, because we do see, as I said, the potential of tiny houses, and we want to make sure that people can do it safely.
Yeah.
Because there is a greater possibility for the toxic exposure in a tiny house, as we've said.
Yeah.
So it needs to be done right.
What is that, talking about square footage, what is the tiniest tiny home you have seen and the biggest tiny home that you have seen? Like, at what point is not a tiny home anymore?
Okay, so we've watched a lot of shows and read magazines and stuff. So what's considered to be a tiny house, I think we saw one that was under 100 square feet. And
wow. Yeah, really tiny.
It was really tiny. I've seen people like build them on the back of a pickup truck or in a van. And this includes a place to sleep, a little tiny kitchen, some kind of bathroom. I'm going to put up, I think next week, this one where this woman did it in a van, and her bathroom was in like a kitchen cabinet, how big a kitchen counter, a lower cabinet,
Mm-hmm.
It was maybe about 6 feet and as wide as a cabinet is. So it had a countertop on it. She lifts the countertop.
Huh.
There's a toilet inside. There's a drain. It's all corrugated metal around on the inside of the cabinet. And she's got a hook, and she hangs up the shower, and she pulls the shower curtain around, and that's her bathroom. And and she, so that's in the back of a van. So people are really, really clever about what it is they're doing in order to be able to fit all these functions in. That would be too small for me. I need to have, we're using our space very judiciously. We're having an office that's big enough to be my office, and we're having a kitchen that's big enough for me to cook. The bathroom's going to be small. We're really looking at like how much of a bathing area do we need, and how much water do we need? And then there's going to be the bedroom, and that's the whole entire house.
So then even your, the way you buy groceries changes, because you don't buy in bulk anymore. You just do like your weekly, I would assume, your weekly groceries at the farmer's market. And then as you start getting rid of stuff, then you buy more, right?
Yeah. So right now we're kind of in this interim state where we went from the 1,600 square foot house to coming to Mom's house. And so where we're living now, we share a bedroom, and it's not the master bedroom, it's the child bedroom. It's that size, and it has a little deck off the back. And then there's an office where we are right now, is in the office room. And it's in a separate building. Larry's parents built this house themselves. And so it met their needs to have a house and then to have outer rooms. They have like a wood shop and a cattery and things like that. So I don't know the size of this room, but a little corner over there is the kitchen. And so if you just imagine a corner of a room, it's maybe 8 feet that way. Mm-hmm. And then we have a little island, and that divides it from the office. And so it's maybe 8 by 6 feet.
For the kitchen area?
For the kitchen area. That's our whole kitchen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a little sink and shelf thing from IKEA that is designed to go into a little tiny apartment. And we put up shelves on the wall, and we have an apartment size refrigerator and a bookshelf that we got for free on Craigslist. And that's our whole entire kitchen. So we do go once a week to the farmer's market, and we have bulk things like, brown rice and stuff like that in big jars. And that's what we eat. We don't have a stove. We have a induction cooktop, one, and we have one toaster oven, and we can't run them both at the same time because we don't have enough power. And
This wasn't set up for it.
So, and we actually borrowed a tiny house idea from tiny houses of putting our cutting board flips up and down, like they have in tiny houses. And so when we want to cut something, it flips up off the side of our island, and then we flip it back down. So it's totally changed how I cook, but not for the worse. I have plenty of space to make simple food, and but we don't roast turkeys, we don't. I'm not baking cakes. I'm not running a catering service. I'm not, I sold my KitchenAid mixer. We do. I mix everything by hand. I have a knife and I have bowls, and it's very simple. But we're eating really well. We have plenty of space for food storage for a week.
Mm-hmm. So
go ahead. Yeah, storage. My other question is, so like, you've got these plans. You're kind of, first of all, we definitely want to stay in touch with you through this whole journey, because definitely in my mind, it's looking like a journey of discovery and how you're going to accomplish these things and deal with everyday life in a much more confined space, especially when you guys get on the road. So things like, obviously having less is sometimes more, but even simple things I think about, and going back to the safety thing is, let's say you have things that you really need that are potentially toxic or off-gassing, even if the lid is closed, like paint, for example, or something. What are you guys doing as far as having storage in the envelope of the space? Are you going to have something maybe separately that you guys could leave outside when you guys are?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back and say again, there's nothing toxic that has to be stored. We don't use toxic paint. Mm-hmm. We do paint things, but we don't use toxic paint. We will use milk paint to paint this house, and we've done that before in Florida. We painted a room with milk paint, and it was fabulous. So we're never going back to toxic paint. It's not necessary. So I don't see any reason to have anything toxic that needs to be stored. We're still working out.
There is storage underneath the motorhome in various compartments.
Oh yeah.
So for the audience that, let's say that they're not on the same, on the same mindset, or they're trying to become this, toxin free. And even like in our journey to have, this toxin free living, we didn't know all the things that were toxic on the way. Right. So, and we're still learning a lot of the toxic products. So when we learned about, even because for us, we thought that, okay, this paint, it's low VOC and it's covered. So that's fine, which later on we found out it was not.
Yeah.
So, for people that are not totally aware of it, and there are people using Myers products still, thinking that they're safe. Yeah. I guess that's where the question is. It's not even like that you were aware of them, because a lot of people are not aware. For those kind of products, would you tell them, would you advise to put them outside, like Larry was saying, under?
Well, yes, of course I would tell them to do that. But I consider my job to be to help people find the non-toxic products so that that's not an issue. So I wouldn't say put your toxic products outside. I'd say let's find a non-toxic product.
There are some things that are toxic, which like motor oil, gasoline, stuff like that, but it's not going to be in our living space.
Right.
Yeah, well, actually, that brings up a good point. Since you are on the chassis of a motor vehicle, it's just like a home. We store things in our garage, and we just found out recently from another speaker that even if it's in your garage, it's still getting into your living space.
Yeah, it is.
It's going to find its way in.
Yeah.
So I would assume vapors from the engine, gasoline potentially at some point will end up migrating in potentially if you're going to be on a motor vehicle chassis.
Well, we're going to do our best to seal those things out and still have ventilation.
Mhm.
So yes, that's a concern, but it would be a concern if we had a truck in front spewing
Sure.
exhaust towards the trailer.
Yeah, sucking
You know.
all these.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are certainly things to work out, and we're not at that point on our journey to have all the answers.
Yeah.
But we have our goal in mind, and we're doing our research. And one thing that we bought is this unit called the Yeti that's very small and has this new battery technology, so that it's just this very small unit, and it will meet all of our power needs. And it only costs like $3,000 to buy the whole thing. And we still need to buy the one solar panel that, but right now we're actually using it now so that we have more power in the office, and we just plug it into the wall. And then, I run it all day, and then at night it recharges. But the amount it takes to run my computer is like so small. And we're actually getting the reality that we could power our whole entire life on this little box. It's really, can you see me? It's like this big. And
it's a little bigger than
that. It's heavy. It's heavy, but it comes with wheels on it, so you can cart it around. And it's just finding those kinds of solutions that you don't even look for if you're living in a big house. And so it's just become a lot of fun to do the creative work of saying, well, now how can we perform this function in the smallest and least toxic and most environmentally friendly way?
Right. And I think it also, like Eric was, he brought up the thing and Larry with the oil. And I think once you start removing toxins from your life, like all the other toxins, like the building materials, the cleaning products, the makeup and the hair products and all that stuff, the exposure, it's way less. So, and as you're saying, you're going to have ventilation. And I think the most important thing is, I think it's for people to be aware that there is a concern and there is a way of fixing it.
I've really found in doing this for 40 years that there's pretty much a way to fix everything. The thing that I can't fix is the outdoor environment, that I used to think, because I always say, that there's so many more toxic chemicals in indoor air than outdoor air. And so at the beginning, I thought if I could just, open the window or bring the outdoor in or spend more time outdoors or whatever, but that's not really the solution. It is in a way, because indoor air is more polluted than outdoor air. But I think it's misleading to think that outdoor air is clean.
Yeah.
And especially like one of the first houses I did, the first houses that I made non-toxic was for a friend of mine who we were both recovering from multiple chemical sensitivities at the time. And I didn't have the money to have a non-toxic home, but he did. And so we did his house. We made, I should put that on my list too, because we totally remodeled his house, little bungalow in downtown Oakland, California. And at the end of all this time and money, what we had was a non-toxic house in a toxic outdoor air place. And he couldn't live in it. And if you can go someplace, so I would say that the first thing is pick a place with good outdoor air. and so places that we're going to be going and parking our tiny house are going to be in better outdoor air places. So we'll like be going to the mountains and the beach and things like that, so that we can step out. I mean, we're already keeping our eyes open for places that we could be parking a motorhome. And there's some beautiful places like right on the coast of California. You're just right there overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And so those are going to be the kind of places that we're going to want to hang out. One thing that I saw recently was an article that said that they have now measured dangerously high levels of mercury in California coast fog. And that's like my favorite. I mean, that it just crushed me when I read that.
One of the things you mentioned parking on the coast. So I also just read a recent article that they're having, I would use the word epidemic of people in tiny home type of scenarios where it's an RV on wheels type of scenario. They're parked on the coast. For some reason, we can't do that here, but in LA, they can. And being a good steward, a lot of these people are their motivating factor for doing this is helping with the planet and more green, but they're dumping all of their sewage onto the road, onto the rocks, which...
Well, they shouldn't be doing that. They should.
Yeah, but where do you put that realistically, though? So there's not yet, from what I've seen, when you're parking in an area that's not a designated RV type of scenario, like practical things of like removing sewage or waste just don't really exist yet. So that's going to be fixed.
Well, I have several answers to that. The first one is that people need to be considerate of neighbors, first of all. Neighbors being neighbors like you have neighbors on the side of your house. Yeah. But I'm talking about global neighbors. And so people shouldn't be dumping anything by the side of the road, and tiny house or not. But there are places, and I think that they're not too far between, where they're public places like campgrounds, where you could drive into a campground. We could like dump our compost or whatever other waste we have in public designated areas. We wouldn't just leave it by the side of the road because we're considerate.
That's disgusting.
Yeah. And I can see that it could be a problem, but it is because the users are just not saying, where are we going to put this?
Yeah, well, you just think about the reality of if you've driven in LA traffic, especially down on Malibu. I mean, it could take you an hour to get to one of those areas. So I just don't think people are going to have the mental capacity or the courtesy, and they're not, to be able to dispose of that stuff. So I think it'll grow, but it's definitely something that needs to be brought up. And
it does need to be brought up. And also, I mean, usually there's some kind of storage outside of the living area, like down underneath, and that people could certainly carry it with them until they got to an appropriate place to dispose of it. But these are all the things that, you move into a house or an apartment, and there's a standard way of handling all these life things. And you don't even think about it. You put your garbage in the garbage can, the garbage man comes and gets it. Yeah. You don't know where it goes, blah, blah, blah. So this all makes it much more immediate. It makes it much more like, here I am, a living being, and there's a living ecosystem. Now, I don't have an account with the garbage company. What am I going to do with my garbage? Yeah. What am I going to do with my body waste? Where am I going to get my food from? How am I going to start? You really start looking at how you're going to do your life intentionally instead of just being part of this larger system.
Yeah, I think it's a great exercise in humanity, and as people do this, I wonder at some point it'd be really neat. This might be something else you guys could do, is see the percentage. Obviously, this would take like a decade or so, is the amount of people that go from a traditional home and way of life to a tiny home and maybe back to somewhere in between at some point. I would imagine like probably 50% of people are going to get those skills and kind of bring them back into what we call quote unquote normal suburban type of living, but still bringing some of the things that they learned.
They might.
It's a big challenge. There's just it's not impossible, but to have a family, I've seen people do it. It's definitely not for us. Like there's no.
I don't think I don't think it's for everybody. And it just occurred to me, I didn't answer the second part of your question when you asked about the smallest and the largest for a tiny house. If you watch a TV show with the word tiny house in the title, they consider it up to 600 square feet.
600.
And so they're showing their clients like bungalows and things like that are small cottage kinds of houses in suburban areas. And when our house, let's see, we've lived in 2 cottages and they were like 650, 700 square feet. So that would still be considered a tiny house, because it's not, I think it starts being a house when it gets to like 800, 1,000 square feet. That's regular house living. When you're at 600 square feet, especially that you have 2 people, you have to be thinking about minimalistic living.
Yeah.
But I don't even think of minimalistic as the concept anymore, because minimalistic means that you have this bigness and now you're trying to make it small. And what I'm starting with is nothing.
Wow, that's a great analogy. Yeah.
I'm starting with me. I'm a person. And then what do I need? And what's the maximum that I need in order to have a happy life, to accomplish what it is that I'm accomplishing? So it's not like, how am I going to make my shower smaller? It's how am I going to wash my body?
Yeah.
Love that. That's fantastic. And another thing I think
I
about
love it too.
it makes you have to work on your relationship with the people that you live with.
Yes.
Because in a big house, kind of when you get into each other's, face, you just kind of, you go to your bedroom, he goes to his bedroom, and then it's like, okay, now when you when you live in a tiny home, you need to solve the conflicts immediately. You can't just pretend
Yes, you do. Yeah, but you see, as I said before, we're in this transition zone right now where we're living in this very tight space. And so I can see this is how much space I need. Like I came from an office that it had 17 feet of windows, and then it was about 10 or 12 feet then back, so it's like 12 by 17, let's say. That's a big room. I had 3 desks. So like I have this big desk here that was, I don't know, it's 6 feet long. Mm-hmm. I had 3 of these desks in a square, and I was using all of them. All the walls were covered with books. I had filing cabinets, all this stuff. And now, really, my whole workspace is this 6-foot desk. And then I have another 6-foot desk behind me. And so I'm like in this little like 8 by 6 corner. And really, not having a lot of space, I'm working in an essential way instead of all of this possible stuff that I don't even use. And so we go through layers of all this stuff that we brought with us. I mean, I've been paying $200 a month for the last 2 years on a storage unit. And I finally said, wait a minute, I'm not using all that stuff. I haven't used it for 2 years. Let's bring it over. Let's bring it over here. And, we're rearranging. We found a little space that we could put it in the corner of a storage room so that I can go through those boxes and say, well, they're not coming in the tiny house. But it's a matter of like taking this big materialistic life and saying, I don't want that anymore. I don't need that anymore. What I need is what's essential to me. Yeah. I need for me to be me, and I need those essential things that I need in order to be alive so that I can function and do the things that I love to do in life.
Yeah. And it's like when we go travel to Brazil, what do I need? And the next thing I know, I have like all those luggages with a bunch of stuff. And then it's over the way. Then we're going like, okay, what can I leave behind? So, then, and I think living in a tiny home, as you said, you need to also start with the mindset. It's not just.
It's exactly where you need to start with. You need to be able to see yourself as not as a minimalist from the viewpoint of this overwhelming, huge amount of materialism, but as as having everything that you need, having everything that you actually need, and looking at your needs. You know, I was laughing when you were talking about your luggage, because you should have seen the first time I went to Europe. I was carrying so much stuff, I couldn't carry it all. I was like, after that experience, my traveling, I didn't take anything I couldn't carry. And so my traveling weight got much lighter, and my life is getting lighter, but I love it. It's like I actually feel less weighed down.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an experience. I just want to tell you about having things versus not having things. And it was about, I used to have 2,000 books, around 2,000 books. And of course, I had to have bigger places. I had to pay for bigger houses to have my big library. Yeah. And when I moved here, and a lot of my books started being sitting in the storage locker for $200 a month, I realized that I didn't need to buy books. I could go to the library. And I know that sounds like a funny thing, but you know, they don't always have books at the library that I want. But what I discovered here, having really fabulous librarians here where I live now, is who are willing to do anything for me to find the book I want, is that there are literally international systems where you can walk into any library and connect with those systems and get any book from any library. Mm-hmm. And so my sense of books is that I now have an abundance of books. They're scattered all over the world, and I could get them anytime I want to. I can't walk over to the shelf and get it, but I can order up any book I want for free. Mm-hmm. And what a sense of abundance. What a sense of expansion.
You have access to all
to know that I have access to all the books on the planet.
Right. Yeah, and for us, we are in a time in our lives that clutter, and especially in an office where there's like so many papers, so many boxes, so many receipts. Mm-hmm. And when we moved to this bigger house, right, we had like more things.
We know, we're laughing because we know.
Right? Yeah. And then it's like there's the boxes that we never even touched, but it's like we need them. So it just is that thing that it makes you feel like it's an uneasy feeling until the day that we realize the clutter. Like our house is very organized, very clean, but just looking at the amount of stuff that we have around really made us feel like we need to get rid of this.
Yeah.
We need to
brings anxiety, really.
Brings anxiety.
And I think that's probably where you guys got to.
Yeah.
It sounds like listening to is, and I think a lot of people, they get that calling is just, you get almost like sick and tired of this. It's like, it's too much. I just need to decompress kind of thing. It's almost like when you felt the toxic load, as you were talking about, when you got sick, it's like, okay, something's got to change.
Yeah. And it did change, you know, not wanting to have to pay the mortgage, not wanting to do the upkeep of the house, having things around me that needed to be maintained or were just sitting there. I mean, even now, I realize it's taken me all this time. I've been working for a couple of years on this dekludge of all these things. And I still have things and where I'm still going through the process. And I look at them and I go, oh, well, my father gave me that. Or, oh, well, this is mine. You know,
I've had it for so many years.
It's mine. And it doesn't matter that it's sitting in a box. It doesn't matter that I will never use it, that I haven't used it, that I even forgot I had it. It's mine. You know?
Yeah, and you said something yesterday that was very, very, very good. You said, I'm not my things.
I'm not my things. That's right.
I love that quote. I'm not my thing.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I finally got to the point where I actually do feel like I'm not my things, that I can be separate and say, I'm Debrah, and I am basically, you know, I'm all these good non-materialistic things, like I'm creative and I'm loving and I'm aware and all these things, and that's me. And then there's the material world, and that's separate, and you could take all my things and I would still be me. And that's what allows me to simplify.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from what I hear from this interview is that tiny homes have a lot of pros, a lot of good things. They are, help with the environment. They give you that sense of freedom. They help you live more for you in your life, less for things. They can save you like financially freedom that you can invest in yourself. But there's also cons that you need to consider, especially when building a tiny home, that it would be very important before you even start the process to work on your mindset and also hire a tiny home, non-toxic tiny home consultant to make sure you are, getting like your health is not being affected by the tiny home. Is that right?
That's totally right. Totally right. And also to allow the time to do the process before you start doing the build, so that you get your planning in and know what it is that you need, and can then, once you start building, you can build and do it right.
And find a safe indoor, outdoor air quality place.
That's right. That's right.
Your house, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully there's a couple websites, and most of the phones have the indoor air quality or outdoor air quality numbers. I'm sure you guys wouldn't want to be anywhere near where you guys were during the fires. I mean, that, all of that.
No, I think it's called Air something now. Airnow.com, I think it is. And during the fires, we were just looking at that every day. Yeah. And, we don't look at it every day under normal circumstances, because it's not like Los Angeles.
Concerned.
It's pretty much the same every day unless something changes. But there are also, for a while, I had an indoor air quality monitor on my phone. And I had a monitor in my house. And I could see where the indoor air quality was changing through the day as it was changing. And the thing that I found, that it was like, I had no indoor air pollution until I turned on my gas stove. Mm-hmm. And whenever I cooked, it spiked.
Yeah.
And so I really got to understand that. So I think that's a good thing for people to do too, is to get that kind of service for a period of time and just see what's going on inside their house.
Even with the electric stove, like our house is a lab. So Eric tests everything. Like if I do something with my hair, my nail polish, anything, Eric will test the air quality. And cooking.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to really kind of lock in. And a great takeaway from this is, even if you build a quote unquote green, healthy, super not low tox or no tox environment, a tiny home, afterwards, what are you doing during your activities that may disturb that environment?
That's right. Absolutely.
Safe.
But you see, we've already figured all that out in our bigger house.
But that's why we need you guys. Yeah. So that would be really love to follow you guys in your journey. Hopefully you guys are going to be taping this and share.
Yeah, it's all going to go on our blog, which is already at that Tiny House Toxic Free.
Awesome. So Debra and Larry, they have a very generous gift as well. And it's Debra's Guide to Creating a Green Bathroom. And it's a case study of a non-toxic bathroom that they built in their home in Florida in 2007. So that's going to be available. And from there, you're also going to be able to follow them, follow their journey, and see what they're doing, what they're finding. Because throughout the journey, when you decided to create your own tiny home, things might change. You might,
Oh, yeah.
That
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, that's construction, right?
Yeah.
That is construction. But also another thing that I've decided to do is that when I send out the newsletter, and it's probably not going to be every week, but maybe every week or two, every time I send one out, I'm going to include a video about somebody else's toxic build, non-toxic, tiny house build, whether it's non-toxic or not. I'm not looking at the non-toxicness. I'm looking at the ideas of how they constructed things, so that people can see the design ideas. And these aren't going to be necessarily non-toxic tiny houses, because I don't think there are many of them. But I'll do my best to show what other people are doing that are the cream of the crop videos.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Larry and Deborah, for
Thank you.
sharing your experience and your journey with us. We appreciate.
Thanks for
You're
having
welcome.
us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.